Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our second forum today, which will focus specifically on our new chair compensation package. As many of you know, the old Appendix G was a hot mess, to put it lightly. And if you want some interesting reading, you can go to our lrcft.org website to see exactly what the old Appendix G looked like on our old contract. But today was, we wanted to make sure that we spent some time specifically on this part of the contract and the proposed changes that we're making under this particular system. As noted in the previous forum, our overarching bargaining team felt it was really important for us to take a look at how we can make improvements for as many people and as many groups as possible. And one of the groups for us that was a priority was addressing the work of chairs. That has been a goal of ours, and I'm really happy to say that our work group that negotiated it, as well as the content experts that were part of putting together the survey and the information, really did what I think is an amazing job of trying to reconfigure our chair compensation system. So first and foremost, I want to thank the two folks who are the negotiators in the room from our team. That's Katie Carberry and James Tells. And I think they have some other thank yous, so I'm not going to step all over their lines. And that is the extent of what I need to say for this. And I'm going to hand it over to, I believe, James.
Thanks so much, Belinda. I'm going to go ahead and share the screen now. Welcome, everybody. And I'm going to thank a group of people real quick that worked on this for the last 3 months. And Jason, the LRCFT president, Jason Newman, was on part of several teams, and he was able to pop in a number of days with us as we negotiated with the LRCCD partners. And I will thank them also, Tammy Montgomery, Derek Booth, and Adam Wyndham. This was the easiest group I've ever worked with when it comes to negotiations, and this is my 4th time doing this. And we started out by just sharing our interests, and almost every one of those interests matched up, and very often does not happen. So I felt like I won an award for being on this particular small team. So thank you for putting me on this, Belinda. Also, I want to really thank Kalinda Jones and Michael Grove, because they were our researchers. So behind the scenes, we had them work on a lot of things while we were in negotiations and working on other stuff. And we met weekly with them, and that was super helpful. They looked at the material that we had come up with, the tentative agreements, and provided advice and changes. So that was excellent. Belinda was there with us. She came and joined a number of our meetings, and both our old and new executive directors, Robert Peroni, who is consulting for us for another semester, and our new full-time executive director of the union, Michael Henderson, were absolutely vital to this. So thank them, and thanks to all those chairs. More than half the chairs participated in the survey. So that was super helpful for us too, to get a feel for what currently is happening and what those chairs were looking for. So what did we do with that information? Well, our new appendix eliminated the old Appendix G. We felt that it was quite outdated. It contained criteria that was really problematic because there was different interpretations across the district where like-minded departments were getting compensated at totally different levels. We wanted to make sure that we had a system that was consistent with kind of the baseline of what chairs do. And we were able to do that by creating a system that is FTE based for our initial placement, FTEF for counseling and library departments, and really based on what a chair's sort of regular workload looks like that most chairs have to do. And then we put in a way of increasing that compensation that's quite easy. The chair and the dean fill out a small form that will go to the appropriate vice president, that can then explain some of the complexities that FTE or FTEF initial placement is not catching. And then that can move someone up then the levels of compensation. That request needs to be by mutual agreement of the chair and the dean as they fill out that form and pass that on to the appropriate vice president. This is a reassigned time only system. So your chair duties are going to be part of your regular full-time workload. If you wish to work overload, then your coursework would be for classroom faculty would be where the overload comes in. And then lastly, this is a pilot program. We're going to be assessing it annually because we're not quite sure of the exact costs yet. We believe we've put enough funding towards it that will make it work, but we're going to monitor that each year to see if we need to make any kind of changes. We also, and I'll stop for questions after this. We also did make some changes to the chair responsibility and duties, and these we did these for multiple reasons. We wanted to make sure that new or potential chairs could see really what it was that might be expected of them as sort of the regular chair duties. And the way that the current contract is written is they're sort of just brief blurbs. But what we discovered was in looking at the chair feedback form, it takes those brief blurbs that are in the contract and really fleshes them out more, not giving additional duties, but explaining what those duties meant. So we wanted to bring those into Article 2. We wanted to acknowledge any of the new roles that weren't there in Appendix G in Article 2. And we're greatly thankful for the input of again, more than half the chairs that participated in the survey, because that really helped us find things like student-related work that was nowhere in the contract in 2 or in the old Appendix G. Super helpful. So any additional language that you actually see that are additional duties, and these are just samples of possible duties, not meaning that you have to do all these duties. Those new things that weren't in the old Article 2 are those items we brought in from the survey that had the most hits of faculty mentioning how much time they're spending on those things. We wanted to ensure that work is better accounted for, not for a punching of the clock, but to make sure people aren't working for free and that their compensation is actually matching their workload. There's really a chronic underestimation of what a chair's workload is, and we think this will help with that. And to clarify and justify improved compensations, the way we've set this up, so you can share those additional items beyond what your initial placement has set you at, that you need to have to be able to do those items. So last thing before we go to questions is we've changed Appendix G, as I mentioned. We have a form that deals with that process. We added that language, as I mentioned, to responsibilities and duties. We had to slightly alter the chair timeline, the section with the election and those items, added a couple items there where this new process plugs in there into that kind of semester timeline. Added some new language because it's not a stipend anymore, et cetera. That's that last piece here. And then we also added for our preference part-timers the ability to be part of that chair feedback process. So let me open it up for any initial questions before we actually open up the documents. Anything in the chat?
I have a question.
Yes.
So one of the problems with the old version of this was that it was completely opaque and there was no way to compare 2 departments. Is this going to be more transparent? Like, will there be a place we can look to find out what chairs or what departments get what reassigned time, or as a result of this, what? Yeah.
That's a great question. And we discovered in the very beginning of this process that some colleges had stuff available for public consumption on their kind of inside page, their faculty page of the website. And so we definitely have sort of pushed district through the process about making sure that there's no reason for this information to be secret. So hopefully these will be in dashboards or whatever your particular college is using for that kind of faculty facing place. I've noted that here to reiterate that again. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Let's see here. Any other questions? Well, would be based
It
off
seems
the-
like we have 2 hands up.
Okay. Lauren?
Yeah, thank you. There were two things that are kind of jumping out, and maybe this will be in the language when we get to that part. One is if a chair feels that their workload goes above purely the FTE metric. So for example, some departments that may have a lot of equipment, like things that were in the old way that chair compensation was determined, those things haven't gone away. So I would think that the chairs that applies to, they would try to make that case. My concern is that that may bring back the mutual agreement sticky point that if a particular chair on a one-on-one interpersonal relationship with their dean, it's not a good relationship, that they might not get approved, or there might not be a place for the mutual agreement. And then what happens? Because the work still has to get done. And then my other question is, if this is something that's signed as soon as within 2 weeks of a chair becoming chair, how often and what would the process be for revisiting it? Because in some departments, you may think you're walking into one thing, but within your 2-year term as a chair, a lot of things can happen that would significantly increase your workload or potentially decrease. Like if your department takes FTE cuts, do you drop down on the scale? Do you maintain? If you're have to go out and do recruiting now for your department because your FTE just got cut, like that's increasing your workload, not decreasing it. If you lose a full-time faculty member and now you're managing more adjuncts in your department, like all those things kind of ripple out. So what's the procedure for being able to change it? And then what are the protections if a particular chair and their dean don't get along, for being able to make the case that maybe a chair needs additional compensation?
Great. I'll start with number 2 there, and Katie, you can chime in too if I'm missing something here. But I think we did definitely have a conversation with district that it would be set in the positive for faculty, so that you know what you're getting into for those 2 years, and it's not going to be a pull back. I don't know if we discussed
During the 2 years.
during the 2 years.
Right.
But I don't know if we discussed what would happen if any additional workload was suddenly added, although I think that would fall back on the piece that already exists and then is reiterated again in these forms, that's where the chair and the dean have to have the conversation of what's coming off the table. What are things that maybe the AA or someone else can do, that this is truly not something that the chair is the only person that could do this work. So it kind of, all of this kind of doubles back to that existing meeting that I know in a lot of places was not happening about chair workload and having a reasonable amount for the level of compensation. For the concern about the dean, again, that would then be the part where we would say, have that conversation. Well, then I need to pull some things off here because this is not going to work. There aren't enough hours in the day for this. And this is a voluntary piece. So if deans misbehave in this way, they may end up having to do most of these tasks themselves, because folks will not want to do this job if they're going to be stopped because of some kind of interpersonal reason. And definitely, I would say if it's obviously apparent that what you're bringing to the table is real and that you should be compensated for that extra work, definitely contact your union representatives, because if this is some type of retaliatory measure by the dean, we can be brought into that conversation. Does that help?
It does. My union reps from my campus will know, like, I'm always the special case, but I'm also chair of chairs on my campus. So I've heard some of these concerns coming up in our meetings. So I'm trying to bring those forward as well.
Thank you. I got them noted here. Definitely. We'll look out for those. So we've got a combination of a lot of things happening in the chat and live people. So maybe if someone...
James, people are signing in the chat, but we have
Okay.
3 people with hands up, but I'm wondering if people have questions that are about how the process would work. We are going to go over that in a detailed series of slides that shows the steps and how it would work. So if there are questions about the process and how it will work, it might be better to wait till you've seen those slides to ask those questions. We also want to show the actual changes, which James has put links to here. And so seeing those might also answer some questions. So I'm not sure how we want to handle the questions. If we want to maybe be a little bit more specific about which questions people should ask now and which questions might be better asked later.
Sorry about that. I think I opened up a little prematurely. Do folks have a question unrelated to the problem? Okay, it looks like the hands went down. All right, so this is, if you folks remember what G looked like before, it was multiple pages with all those various factors that gain different points depending on where you were graded in those particular factors, like amount of equipment, etc. So we were looking for something that would be a simplification as a starting point, and we were able to drum up through the faculty bucket enough funding to get to a starting point that most faculty will be in a better place than they were. And if they aren't, that they have that option of filling out the form, and you'll see the form in a second, and checking B, that this is not adequate, and here are the additional items that I must complete that my dean and I agree should bump us up to the next level or two. And so this is the actual new G. It is a single
James,
page.
we can't see it. I think you need to change your screen sharing.
I'm sorry about that.
That's okay.
How about now?
That's good. And you might want to zoom it in a little.
You got it. Can do.
Thank you.
Is that big enough? A little bit bigger?
Yeah. I think it's pretty good. I can see it anyway. Can everybody see it? Yeah, okay, we're good.
So we can see as we explained that for the majority of our faculty, those are our classroom faculty, that this will be FTE based, your initial placement, and then we'll be looking at the actual bodies in your department for FTEF, using the FTEF for counseling and library departments. We know that we're going to have, say, like in CTE or CE, we're going to have some folks that are going to be placed because of the FTE at a lower level initially. And the district and the local administration understands that those are going to be some of those first folks filling out the form saying, I need additional adjustments for these additional things that we do. So we do recognize that there are going to be departments that are going to need to do that. We do have to ratify this, and if it's ratified, then we also need to get it to the board. But the colleges are starting to do some preliminary work just so we're ready to get this going. And City College is having their reorganization, so they're a little bit further ahead than everybody because they've sort of had to look at these issues over the last, I think, several semesters. We are going to have copies of these forms kept by the district, and we'll be able to get them upon request as needed. If there are any problems, the union can get those. We can see here, I want to show you, explain here how this initially works. So you can see the FTE level or FTE and FTEF for the various faculty types, the level number, and then the amount of reassigned time, and then what that average number of hours would be on a weekly basis. We are, part of this is that there's a requirement that chairs reassigned time is going to be part of that load, and that levels 1 through 3, those chairs can combine their fall and spring reassigned time if needed in order to take a course release in either the fall or the spring.
It looks like we have a question from Elizabeth.
Sure, Liz?
So I know we're going to get into the additional stuff, but looking at this chart and knowing every department's going to have that different stuff, like I'm in a CE, when this was negotiated, what was assumed to be in this base FTE? Scheduling, ADPs, like what general work is kind of included here? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, go ahead, Katie.
Maybe I don't understand the question. Let me just check. So the FTE is defined as a specific thing for instructional programs, and it's the average annual FTE, which they defined as the final fall FTE of instruction and the spring FTE at census. So that's what the FTE is. But are you asking that, or are you asking
No,
like?
I'm asking like, so. Okay, so just for example, my department, I'm pretty small, so I would fall under level 1 because we have less than 5 FTE per semester.
Right.
So that would, let's just say that's my base. Now with that, that's in that work that I'm getting paid for, that includes like the department chair responsibility of doing my ADP every year and scheduling and
Okay,
then I
so-
would probably need to go back to my dean because I have 30 articulation agreements and I manage grant funds. And so
Right,
when you
yes.
look at this base, what's included? Like I said, scheduling probably, and
Well,
what isn't over? Or,
let me frame it
does
a
that make
different way
sense?
for you, because we're all used to the old system. And in the old system, you just did everything and you didn't really think about it in terms of workload. At least I didn't. I'm also department chair. So one of the goals that we were hoping to achieve with this is that people would have a clearer guideline about what is and what is not an acceptable amount of workload for each amount of reassigned time. And so in this table, and there's a bunch of legal stuff in here, you're going to see this footnote. The footnote, the lawyers made us put the footnote there, to be honest with you. The footnote is like, this may not account for the exact hours worked or whatever, but it's
Sure.
called anticipated average hours per week. So if you're looking at this and you see 1.0 FTE is the initial placement and it says 3.5 hours per week, and you're saying all this stuff that I don't really know what it is because I'm not you and I'm not your dean. But if you go to your dean and you say, okay, look, Dean, you and I both know that I spend more than 3.5 hours a week on this because I'm required to, and the department chair needs to do this. It's, other faculty can't help, whatever it is. Maybe there's a requirement from an external agency that you have to do these things. You explain all that to the dean. The dean goes, yes, of course. That's why you had 0.2 reassigned time before. And then you explain that to the VPI. And ideally, our vision for this is that the VPI as well would see that those things were required for a workforce program and then approve of that.
Okay, so that makes sense. So just
That's our goal.
the average anticipated hours, there's no bucket for it. That's just saying with that FTE, that's about what you're doing.
Yeah, and actually,
I got
if you think about it, it kind of makes sense, because if we're all working 7 hours or 8 hours a day, then 0.2 FTE would be like a fifth. That would be like 1 day, so like 7 hours.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
Lorinda?
Yeah, so I'm from the perspective of a very small department, 1 FTE per semester. And I'm not sure that this matrix accommodates a department where there's only 1 full-time person who is also the chair. Because, and I guess I'll see more when you look at the responsibilities, but when there's no one to delegate to, without paying them an adjunct, an ESA or something like that, when it all falls on 1 person, even though it's only that much FTE, the responsibility is still the same. And if it's a CE program, you're supposed to renew your curriculum, your courses every 2 years, and it can be really cumbersome. So I hope that I see that there's another way, that there's some compensation there, because it feels like the matrix just goes by FTE and doesn't like take into consideration that there's no one to share with.
Yeah, this is just the initial placement. And so for a department like yours, you would definitely be filling out the form, checking the B box, which why don't I get to the form and I'll
Okay.
show you. So yes, that we're fully taking into account that there are going to be departments that must be adjusted right away to match what your actual workload is. And let me open up.
James, while you're doing that, I think there were a couple questions that I think I want to answer real quick. Is that when you're looking at the FTE determination, that left-hand column, or FTEF, it is based off of the average of fall and spring. So for this round, it would be based off of fall 22 and spring 23, the average of those 2 semesters.
Thanks. Thanks.
There
Belinda.
definitely seems to, okay, so I want to address this FTE thing, because I think that maybe some of the questions that people might have are based on like, what even is FTE and what are we talking about? So like, let's use let's use this question in the chat as an example. So if Department X staffs 4 FTE for fall and 3.8 for spring, what would that mean? Well, their average annual FTE would be the average of those. It would be 3.9. So that's the first thing. So it's the average of the fall and spring, not the total. And that's just the way the district defined it. Also for any other people who might have questions about FTEF, what is the difference between those? FTE is based for instructional departments where there are teaching faculty. It is basically a way of measuring the number of classes that are being offered in that department. So like if it's my department has like 13 FTE right now this semester, and that's because if you add up all of our 0.2 classes, each 0.2 class is 1/5 of an FTE, and then 1 FTE is 5 of those. So it's a way of measuring the number of classes. FTEF is going to be for library and counseling. And the reason for that, Antonio, is because, you know, in library and counseling, it's not really possible to use the number of classes to measure the size of the department in the same way. So FTEF is based on the number of, and James will say what it is because he's a librarian and he knows. It's based on like the number of faculty, right, James?
Yeah, full and part-time faculty.
Okay, so I just wanted to make sure everyone understood that. So, and the way it's defined in the contract is not that you add them together. It's that if it is a classroom department, it is based on FTE. If it is a library and counseling department, it is based on FTEF, not adding them up. So like if there was a counseling department that had a certain FTEF, they would not, if they offered classes through the counseling department, add the classes FTE to that. There are just two separate ways of calculating it. And that's just what we had to, that's what we had to work with here.
Katie, I'm sorry, can I just get a point of clarification? Because I think you said one thing and chat is saying something else on my example.
Oh,
So with
did I
the
misunderstand what you were
average-
asking? I'm sorry.
No, so no, you were fine. So the average would be a 4 FTE and a 3.8 if they had to take a little cut or something along the way. So that would be 7.8 divided by 2. So the average would be 3.9, which means they'd be a level 1 compensated chair, not a level 2. Because I said my
Yes,
math, I
that's
thought
what
we were
it
adding
means.
them.
Yes, that's what it means. Now, I also want to say this because I think I want people to be able to see that overall this system is probably going to result in almost everybody receiving more compensation, sometimes much more compensation than would have ever been possible on the old model. I know that some small departments may see this initial placement and have concerns if they were at 0.2 reassigned time before, and now this says 0.1, you might feel like, wait a minute, what is going on here? But we have designed this process in a way that we think will allow those chairs to basically, if you go down, James, on this form,
Sure.
you'll see there's a box that you check to request an increased amount of compensation based on your workload. And so you would go to the dean and you would say, you know, Lauren, you would say, I still do all this stuff. I still have to do these grants and this, you know, these reports and everything. And it takes me more than 3.5 hours a week, as you well know. And ideally, they would just increase it. This is very similar to the way Appendix G was before, in the sense that it relied on the administration calculating a certain amount of compensation based on the types of complexity that you do in your work. The idea with this initial placement thing is that most people, I know this might not seem like it if you're in a very small department, but most people will not need to request an increase. And this will make it so that the administration can carefully review the requests they receive. And I'm hoping that people will receive compensation that's commensurate with what they're being asked to do.
Lorinda's hand is up.
Yeah, okay, Lorinda.
Yeah, so I'm going to go back to a comment someone made earlier about when you have a strained relationship with your dean and you are the only person in the department and you are the chair and you have no one to delegate to, and you're being moved into a different home base area. So the dean that you're having now is not the dean you're going to be working with, but they're the dean making decisions now, like how much FTE you get. It gets pretty complicated. And so I'm wondering, you know, if there is a contingency in here somewhere apparently it's just to ask your union rep to come in and help you with this. Is that how you would?
I can flesh that out much more. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
So there's, the district knows the intent of what we came together and agreed to. And the intent is certainly not for personality issues to interfere with us in any way. So it wouldn't be the president of the union at the campus going to the dean. It would be going to the VPI to tell the VPI, clean this up, take care of business, because they know three of the VPIs were on the negotiating team, and VPSSs for that matter. So people know what the intent of the union and the district are on this, and bad behavior will be stopped. So who knows, this might be a way of stopping someone's bad behavior that maybe there hasn't been an attempt to have their bad behavior stopped yet. But it's important that that you all know, that the members know, the district and the union have agreed to what this is, what the intent of it is, and it is definitely not allowing an individual to mess with a faculty member in any way. Craig?
Yeah, and I know you're still going to give the scenarios here, but since we're talking about this, I think there also is something else the union needs to consider with this in terms of how we deal with these situations where we're going to go through this form, which I think is good, and that's for everyone else. Remind yourself that we used to have Appendix G, but for some departments it was never looked at for 20 plus years. So I mean, that is going to be, I think that's one of the improvements here, is that's going to be a normal part of business, and it should be. And if we lose FTE, we're going to have to readjust. I mean, if our departments are smaller, we arguably shouldn't be getting release time we had 20 years ago. So the thing though, I think the union didn't, and then maybe you're going to explain this, is this is also coming out of the bucket, right? And we know we got to figure out what this looks like and how it's going to affect the bucket, but we need, I think, at some point to build in union representation here for these conversations. And it's really not spelled out that I can see. So this idea that the VPI is the final arbiter of this is a little concerning. And like I say, I mean, I know the district knows what we're trying to do here, but we are a little ahead of SCC because we had to do this with the reorg, and we're trying to figure out like who becomes a department or how we split. And maybe at some point we have a process here where the union and the academic senate, so other people are involved. I think that's one concern, because at some point, think of another scenario where not like, someone like Lorinda is being denied, and they need to have representation. We also got to guard against people going to their dean and saying, hey, I should be a department, and then somehow the dean doesn't care and it gets through, and all of a sudden we're getting hit in the bucket because something's going on here that doesn't really follow what we're trying to accomplish. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
I think there's a little bit of a disconnect here in terms of how the role the union should play in this.
Yeah, two pieces there. That last part, definitely. There are processes through the Senate for that kind of gateways about departmental creation, et cetera. So we definitely would want to work with them and strengthen that, and not allow, people can't just say they're in a department. There's a process. So totally get that, and that needs to be broadcast. This is the best we could get. We did have a faculty heavy final say in this, that was Senate and union with a vote each, and then administration with a single vote. And that was a sticking point for them. So that doesn't mean that it's a forever sticking point. So this is sort of a work in progress, Craig, and the union side totally wanted to have one more step involved. Their argument was, let's try it out, see if it works. If those things don't come up, if they come up, let's sit back down and talk about that. So that's kind of where we left it with them on this. Katie, do you have anything you want to add about that, or Belinda?
I feel like it's okay to just bluntly say that if we had required another step like union approval of the requests or an appeal process, this would not have been agreed to by the administration. They were unwilling to do that. So we did the best we could with that. I do think that a lot of the questions that are being, not all of the questions, I don't want to defer anyone's important questions, but I think that some of these questions may be clearer if we go through the example.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, given the timeline of this meeting, if we, James, do we want to, what do we want to do
Yeah,
here?
let's
Because I
jump.
don't want to run out of time
You want to
for
go
the
to,
example.
do you want to look at this one here? I'll share this, or do you want me to skip right to the example?
And I also see if you are putting questions in the chat, I know people want their questions to be answered. However,
Oops.
I don't want to miss any questions. So if you're directing any questions directly to only me in the chat, I can't read them right now. I can see that they're there, but I can't look at them right now. I'm sorry.
And Katie,
So
I'm also trying to answer questions in the chat as we go. If we,
please direct questions in the chat either to everybody or to Belinda right now, because I'm not able to read them while I talk about this. I apologize. I'll look back later and make sure I did not miss any. Okay, so this is basically an overview of the process, and I think maybe this is what people need to see, because you're thinking, how is this going to work, right?
All right. There we go.
So, okay, yeah. So
Oh boy, sorry about that.
James is going to go back to the slide with the start of the process.
There
Thank
we
you. Okay, so if this contract is ratified, not right now, but in the future, this is how it would work going forward. In March, the dean would send a notification to the faculty in the department about elections to be held in April. That is actually what is supposed to happen now. We understand it doesn't always happen in every department, or if you are a one-person department, that may be kind of irrelevant now. But that notification in the future is going to include this FTE amount, this annual average FTE, or if you are a library or counseling department, the FTEF, it will say your FTE is this, or your FTEF is this. So there won't be questions that faculty need to ask about, like, what even is the FTE? They will know. Then the chair elections and nominations process is going to happen the same way as it always has. The reason that we're asking the deans, and this is written into the new contract language, so we're actually telling them, I guess, if this is ratified, that they have to send out the FTE information first, is so people can understand before they run for chair and before the election, what is this initial placement based on FTE? So the newly elected chair, this is the last step here, the newly elected chair would know their initial placement based on FTE in the future before they even ran for chair. And that is that chart that James was just showing. Okay, so there's a second series of steps that happen after this. So after the election results are announced, you get an email from your dean. If your department's anything like mine, you get an email saying only one person ran and only one person voted for them and you've been elected again, Katie, haha. Or, maybe the elections are more competitive in the future because now there's actually reassigned time instead of stipends for most departments. Either way, you get the notification of who is elected to be the chair, and the dean and the newly elected chair meet. This is also something that is already supposed to happen in the contract language currently of the old contract. We understand that not all deans did this, but it is something that would also be part of the contract in the future if this was ratified. So you would meet with the dean after you were elected to be the department chair. And then there are two outcomes of that meeting, because you will talk about what workload you're going to do, what are the responsibilities of the chair in that department, and so on. There are two outcomes. Now, outcome A is what I think will happen in most departments. Outcome A is that you will look at the initial placement and agree that the workload can be made appropriate or already is appropriate for the number of hours listed on that table. If you agree, you check box A on the form, which basically says the chair and the dean have met and talked about this, and we agreed that the chair's responsibilities can fit within this number of hours on average. Not the exact same number of hours every week, but like on average, it's a reasonable approximation. If there are departments that have a low initial placement because they are small, like some of you are raising, this is a serious concern that we thought about. a lot. I thought about it every day for months. I had nightmares about it. I think we came up with a pretty good solution. So if your department FTE initial placement is not enough to account for the expected workload of a department chair in your department, and you and the dean sit there and say, yes, that's true. This department chair needs to do more work than what is reasonable within the number of hours listed, then you check box B, and you and the dean submit a request for increased reassigned time to the VPI. This has to be done within 2 weeks so that it can be, reviewed in a timely fashion and everything. The other thing you could do if you meet with your dean, and I don't know if this is an option that some people might prefer. It kind of seemed like maybe it was based on some of the comments we got on the chair survey. But if you meet with your dean and you say, actually, the department chair in this department has to work 15 hours a week, but this table says that I should only work 3.5 hours a week, and 3.5 hours a week is fine with me. Can you reduce my responsibilities so I can just do the really necessary stuff and someone else do this other stuff? If they are willing to do that and they agree to that, you have the option to agree to that as the chair. So that's another option that you would have. But in general, I think that probably most chairs who have a lot of responsibilities will compare what they do to the table and then request the increase or not. Okay, so for departments that request the increased reassigned time relative to their initial FTE-based placement, the final step is hearing from the VP about whether it's approved. We tried to negotiate an appeals process and we were unsuccessful in that part. So there isn't another way to appeal the decision. However, we did get them to agree that if they don't approve, if the VPI or the VPSS, if it's counseling or library, doesn't approve the increase, that they will explain in writing why it was not approved. We also got this final step into the process, which is that if it's not approved, then the dean and the department chair need to meet again to reprioritize the duties so that the chair is not being asked to do more work than what is appropriate for the amount of reassigned time that they're getting. Now, in some cases, if the amount of work is something that the chair really, really wants to do, and it's not like a huge amount, then they might choose to use some of their college service hours to do those things. And that's another option that chairs have if they're in that situation. If an increase is not approved, this is a great question that I just saw pop up on my screen. If the increase is not approved, did the chair have the option to quit? Yes. Being a department chair is completely voluntary. No one is required to be a department chair, and you do not have to be a department chair. Nobody has to be a department chair. And I think that if people truly feel that they cannot function in the role of department chair with the amount of reassigned time on this table, and they've met with the dean and they were unable to resolve it, they have a couple other options as well. They could stay as the department chair and just say, I'm not going to do some of this stuff, because we do have some say over how we spend our time. Or they could quit. They could just say, okay, I'm not going to be the department chair, and then the dean will have to do all of it, I guess, which I would think that most deans would be motivated to avoid. So we're hoping that that won't happen too often. Okay, James, are you going to do this example, or do we want to? Okay, let's do the example.
Yeah, we can do that. I don't know. We don't have a lot of time for questions, but yes, we could do that.
I can stay on after this because I think that there are a lot of questions, and I'm a little bit concerned that we haven't really fully explained this system. So I can stay after 1:30.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so here's possible outcome one. The VPI approves the increase. The basket weaving chair decides all the work that the chair and the dean submitted in the written form, receives requested reassigned time. Possible outcome two, they do not approve the increase. The chair meets with the dean to reprioritize. They decide the chair will spend less time training part-time faculty, for example, and they can be encouraged to do professional development on their own instead. The dean and the office staff will help with grant reports, for example. So that's kind of a reprioritizing and taking things off the plate that that the chair feels like I'm not getting compensated for, so someone else is going to do this work. Oh,
So we have a list of questions that I thought people might have when I was making this. One of the questions that I think some people were already trying to ask was, how will the process work this year if the contract is ratified? Because it's already after the time that the chair elections happened. So the normal process that it would be in the future can't happen quite that way. And the answer is it would be on a modified timeline this summer. The chairs are going to receive, if this contract is ratified, a communication from the dean, or maybe from the VPI and VPSS. We don't know exactly how they're going to handle it this time because it's modified. So if you were an elected chair, you would want to respond to those by the deadline that they put. What if the chair and the dean don't agree? Well, we talked about that already. You and your dean would need to reach an agreement about expectations. I want to point out, especially for anyone that is new, that this is already true. It's already possible for deans to give people a lower amount of compensation than the chair thinks is appropriate. Right now, that means they get a stipend and no reassigned time. And the value of the stipend is very, very low. It is like, it is not an amount of money that is very interesting to most people. So right now, there's already a potential for conflict and stuff like that to happen and to affect compensation. The difference is that, at least with this new system, there is a higher initial level of reassigned time. In the old system, the initial level of reassigned time is 0. Do increased amounts of reassigned time roll over? No, the administration wouldn't agree to that. And that kind of makes sense, because we had concerns about that as well. One of the problems that was raised as we were doing the research on this is that in some departments, the Appendix G evaluation hadn't been done in over 20 years, meaning that departments were still receiving the same compensation that they had been 20 years ago. And in some cases, that meant that programs that had gotten a lot smaller were receiving reassigned time. In some cases, it meant that programs that had grown a lot were receiving like the low level stipend, and that probably wasn't appropriate. So I think both sides had an interest in making sure this is reevaluated every couple years so that people are still getting appropriate compensation. And then the last question, what if the contract isn't ratified? You can, well, I guess if the contract isn't ratified, it's kind of a package deal. So it's the yes or no in the whole thing, right, Belinda? Yeah, so if the contract isn't ratified, we're going back to what we have. And I will tell you that almost everybody in this district receives a stipend and not reassigned time before. The value of the stipend was much, much less than the, it was not equivalent to the amount of work that was being done. And I genuinely think that the new system will work out better for most people. I know it's stressful to have to request an increase to get back up to the amount of reassigned time you had for people who had that before. But I do think still that overall this system is best for everybody because it lets everybody have reassigned time and request more if they feel that's needed. Thank you.
Katie, we got Kalinda and Craig in the queue. Kalinda, I have you up.
Thanks. I wanted to acknowledge that I heard people's concerns about needing union representation around discussing this with the dean and the VPI's ability to not support this, especially for small departments. So I just wanted to let everyone know that I know Katie spoke to this, that hopefully we were very helpful. As a former chair of a small department, a department of one, we really try to keep our eyes on this. So we're hoping that this works for you. We believe it does. At the same time, what we found in our research is vast variability around the district, vast variability. And I think this is what Katie was referencing. And my personal belief in looking into what we found from the survey, et cetera, is that one of our problems is that faculty are not empowered and there is not transparency among chairs. And so, yes, I think that I'm hoping that we can find ways as a union to support chairs in these discussions with their deans. I'm willing to do that at Folsom. And I think we can do that for each other as well, because like if someone else gets something and you don't know how people are filling their forms out and talking and it's all like some secret, then what we're doing is some weird direct dealing as opposed to using our contract. I think many of us are not having that annual meeting with our dean that the contract says is supposed to happen anyways. You can't really be an effective department chair as it says in the contract if you're not having a working relationship with the dean. Not that that's always easy. So I just want to say that I heard those concerns and I want to see faculty empowered and I want to support faculty in that empowerment. I hope this is helpful to people and works. And I would love to see chairs across the district more connected to each other so that that weird variability that we saw does not continue. But overall, this compensation is way higher than it was before.
Craig?
Yeah, and that's kind of the final comment is it's gonna be interesting, or it's gonna be sticky. I can feel some people's trepidation in the room, but I think as a whole, the group did a pretty good job of something that the City College, we've been asking for this for well over a decade, you know, that we needed to do something better with chairs compensation. So hopefully we can iron some of this stuff out. And I wasn't going to say it, but Kalinda, you brought it up, and maybe I can help with this. Right, Lauren, it's nice to meet you, and some people have contacted me. If people don't know, we have a really strong chairs council at City College. It's been part of our culture for a long time, and that's maybe something we can work on as a district, is to make the chairs council a little bit more robust than other colleges, and maybe we can do a better job of connecting those councils, so we can deal with this stuff more at a district level. And I mean, I don't know, people can say whether chairs at City College or the council is good or not, but I think it has a place, and I think that there's a model that can be used by the other colleges to help with this kind of stuff.
Hey, Craig, how long are you going to be DCC chair? Another 2 years?
Nope. Last meeting I just set up for next Wednesday. I'm out. Never gonna see you people ever again.
So Craig is available for consultation services, just so you know.
I'm more than happy to help with. I believe in the chairs council. I think it's important and it's helpful. I think at the college we get stuff done as a result of the chairs council. When we go to the admin and say, "We think this is a problem. Here's how we can fix it," and they listen.
And then I have Lorinda in the mix there too. I think with a question.
Yeah, well, for me, it's logical that the plan seems it should be viable as long as the relationships are workable. But for me, the hitch is this transition with the realignment at the same time, because that is supposed to happen this summer at ARC. And so if you have a dean that knows that you're not going to be with them and they are already trimming your FTE and not willing to, whether it's implicit or explicit, that you've gotten chiseled down and some other departments running electives and you can just barely run your core, right? Those are the things that impact this transition. And I would much prefer to be talking to the dean I'm going to have in the fall than the one that I have now. And, because it gets very tricky. And, I went from almost 3 FTE down to a 0.9 for my department since the pandemic, because we had to shut down so many courses that were being run in off-site locations and had to revise my whole program. And now I'm being penalized for making it easier for students to graduate, for doing all these changes and all this work to get a better program, because at a 0.9 FTE per semester, instructional FTE, I'm getting nothing.
So I think, yeah, and I think Lorinda, I think Orenid over at ARC, and I think all of the college presidents, we're happy to assist where we can on some of these issues, help with the navigation of that as well. And I know that every person here may have very unique circumstances that we may need to help out with as we roll this up. We're not under any illusion that that it's going to be clunky at the offset in terms of switching systems. But we also were really, this group was very vigilant about trying to make sure that we created more time, right, for folks to be able to do the work and to increase the compensation. Because as a reminder, at level 1, your annual stipend was $3,897 under the old contract, right, for that level one small department. The, you know, the combined 0.2 at that level one is worth what, I should have this memorized. Katie had it memorized, 7,000, a little over,
Well,
it depends on your step, actually, because it's in load, so.
here's the thing, before this, the maximum amount of reassigned time that anybody could get for, unless it was a huge department like math or English or something, realistically was 0.2 FTE per semester. And now in this new system, everybody will get some reassigned time. To me, that's a huge benefit. I also want to point out here that even though I totally hear your concern, Lorinda, and it sounds like it is difficult, and you, Lauren, as well. And I knew when we were talking about this stuff that it would be stressful for small departments to have to request the increase. But Appendix G was kind of like that anyway. It was open to interpretation, and a lot of deans with Appendix G, would get different results than the chair thought it should be. So this has always sort of been part of the process. Even in the old system, it's still going to be true if we go back to the old system, if the contract doesn't get ratified, that the dean and the chair might disagree. That's just, it's an unfortunate part of this issue. So yeah, so the point, there's one other question, I guess, about the lab FTE. I will answer that now. Sorry, I ignored it earlier. There's too much going on. Yes, so there are lab lecture class loads that are 0.283 or 0.293 FTE, depending on the discipline. That is true. We also have a class like that in my department. Now in this new chart, the FTE amounts that are listed for the reassigned time are in increments of 0.1, because that's kind of how this organization tends to function. And I understand the frustration that comes with teaching a class that does not fit into that, because I sometimes teach that class and it is annoying to get reassigned time that doesn't match the amount of FTE of the classes that you teach. So I just want to acknowledge that. I can't even, is it Heike that asked that? I'm sorry. I know someone asked it.
Yes, that was me. Thank you, Katie.
Oh, yes.
I apologize for earlier. I totally understand when it gets overwhelming in the chat.
Oh, it's okay. It's okay. I just want to acknowledge it. I'm
Yeah,
acknowledging that that's a
you.
problem. And also we put in, so what we tried to do is we tried to put in, and it's in like a footnote of this chart, that the chairs can combine the reassigned time from fall and spring if needed to take a course release. I believe that's the exact language that's in there. So it doesn't totally solve this problem, but you might be able to work with that language to maybe take a course release in one semester, but not the other, or something like that, in a way that is a little bit different than just load balancing. So I would ask, if it was me, I would try to work with the dean to see if there was a way to make an adjustment on that. I would ask about it. I do think, though, that this is part of a bigger problem, where as long as the labs and the lectures are not worth the same FTE, that we're always going to run into these issues. And that's a separate issue that we are, that the union is convening like a task force on, right? Belinda is addressing the lab lecture thing this year. So that might be something that we can resolve partially through that as well. I don't know.
And we may also need to look at load balancing, that if, let's say if you're a small department and have those, was it 0.283s, and you have only one 0.1 release per semester, we'll try to figure out, like, these are the sort of hiccups that we knew we may have to work through in terms of thinking about it as a 2-year load balancing cycle to figure all of that out. So it is on our list of things, like how do we figure those pieces out? Because rubber hits the road, we knew we were going to hit some of these hiccups, but we're not ignoring it, but we have to figure out how we'll address it as well. I think that's a question as well too.
I added, sorry, into the chat that folks were asking for the responsibilities and duties, that I added a link to that.
I need to pause because I want to thank our ASL interpreters. We had them only contracted till 1:30, so I'm hoping that nobody needs interpretation. I didn't see any of our folks here, but we'll
I
make
guess if there was any question from anybody who needed interpretation, could they raise their hand now?
we can enable closed captioning.
Okay, let's do that.
thank you both. Well, we didn't realize it was going to go over.
Ada?
I just want to first of all start by saying thank you. I cannot believe what it took to achieve what you guys did. And I know this has been a stressful meeting in terms of how we're going to make it work, but it's already better for me, I know, than what it was, because I was already at 0.05 a semester. So that was silly to take 0.05 a semester, give me $7,000, you know? So I already know it's better. And I just clearly didn't even know what the annual meeting was, never been asked of that. So now I know that, so that's going to be better. And so, and I bet I'm not the only one in the room who didn't know. And so even as stressful as it's all been, I really want to end on a positive and just say, I couldn't have done it. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Thank you. Real
Thanks,
quick,
Ada.
I wanted, before I go to the last two questions there, that we will, thank you for the folks that are concerned about nefarious practices, because now we'll get together, the union, and talk about how we're going to have a conversation with the VPs about this issue on the back end of this. So we appreciate that greatly. And Ian, I think you're next.
Sure, thanks, guys. My question's about when the VPIs are doing the approval process, do they have like a budget of the release time they are working from, that they're pulling from? So they can theoretically, as long as everybody's increased amount that they want is appropriate, they can just go as high as they need to as for the reassigned time?
Well, the money comes out of our faculty bucket, just to be straight up, which means, we've budgeted, in addition to what was already budgeted for chairs, we have budgeted an additional $1 million of ongoing dollars towards chairs compensation. We believe that this is a buffer of where we think people will land. We buffered that number. So again, for us, we from a fiscal standpoint, we're going to be monitoring this every year to make sure that we're being fiscally responsible. But the money ultimately comes out of our bucket. And what that means, right, is that when it comes out of our bucket, we're making decisions with dollars that come in that could go towards salary, leaves, all sorts of other things. So we've budgeted an additional $1 million to be able to address chair compensation needs. And we're hoping that we completely over budgeted and and I guess one of the things I want to reflect on is, I know Ada said this when they were saying, but Katie and James were up to their eyeballs in numbers, and they ran it past like Kalinda and Michael and our teams to try to make sure that they were beyond diligent in making sure that we did the best we could to predict where the cost would fall. So we did like I said, our team did our best to make sure we estimated this to the best of our ability. So hypothetically, the money shouldn't be the issue, but I think the real issue is what you all are talking about. Where is the line of my responsibilities, right? And I think the other thing I want to say that I think is an important principle here: don't do work you're not paid for, right? So if they're saying we're not willing to raise the amount of money because we want you to do outreach, and you said no, then don't do the work, right? If they're saying, Kalinda, I think it's your responsibility to do reporting on X, Y, and Z, and you looked at it and you said, you're not giving me more time, Kalinda's not going to do the work. And I just really have to emphasize that that's the important part of this meeting, is come out with a written list. I'm always a big believer, write the list. We have shared agreements. This is what we're doing. Document that for yourself. And that's why even if you look at the form, it says if you're asking for increased compensation, because I see like, Richard right in the middle of my screen here, I know he does like strong workforce grant stuff and has to do all of these compliance things, right? And like, okay, so you're not going to give me more time for doing this report, then guess what? The dean can do the report. I just have to say that it's really important for you to hold the line on not doing uncompensated work as chairs. I think, I don't know what order we're in, so I'm going to let James go.
I think Lorinda.
Miranda, yeah.
Yeah, I got a big sigh of relief when it was mentioned that we could balance from one semester to the other, because that may be a way that I can get through my first semester, right? and then be with my new dean and working with them. So is there anything in this that would prevent a re-examination of that for 2 years, right? Because I have to negotiate first with one dean, and then I'm going to be with another dean as of fall, right? Will there be a way that it can be?
I think it's just gonna, if this contract is ratified, I think that it's just gonna be redone every 2 years. So I think like the lowest amount that anybody can get as their initial placement on this is 0.1 per semester, which is the same thing as 0.2 course release once per year. That is the absolute minimum amount of reassigned time that anyone can receive. I just want to be clear on that. So let's say you got 0.1 and you used to get 0.2 per semester because under the old Appendix G, your dean agreed that you were doing a lot of work and gave you a lot of points. But now for some reason, even though they agreed to that in the old version of the system, the new version, they say, no, we're not going to give you credit for that anymore or whatever. It can't be resolved in any way. Unfortunately, I do think that the way, yeah.
I'm going to interrupt that just because ARC is in a special situation.
Oh no, okay.
And home bases.
Home bases, oh God, I don't even barely know what that is, okay.
We as the union have the right to negotiate impacts of your structural change. And so I've written this down as a possibility of things that are under impact. And I have that on a list because we need to first see what happens to y'all, because you're in process right now, but the union reserves the right to negotiate the impacts of any restructure. So my slight abbreviation to Katie's question is, under normal circumstances, if you'd already been reorganized, et cetera, it's every 2 years. ARC, because you're in the middle of a restructure, the union has the right, and I've written this down as something, as a potential impact that we need to negotiate. And that would be the same for every department in ARC under home bases. So I just kind of want to note that really quickly.
I'd like to add on to that too, a question basic for you, I guess. So I know in crafting this with our district counterparts, they wanted this to run smoothly, and a part of things running smoothly will be what happens when people are housed with their new people. So I'm wondering if another argument you could make with district bigwigs on this is that, doesn't it make more sense for someone to have these conversations now with their new dean so they can get the chops about what their faculty are doing in this area that they're unfamiliar with as a dean? So yeah, just wanted to add that.
Never hurts to ask, and yes, it is part of impact negotiations. So sorry, the home base part of this just came right back into my head, Lorinda. So it just sort of clicked. So I probably should have said that about an hour ago.
That's all right. I'm very excited. I feel much better. However, there is one last little tweak to it, is that the dean I'm moving to is interim, and they're hiring the permanent. So, you know, it's one caveat on top of another.
Yeah, there's an epidemic of interim administrators all over the district.
Yeah.
Any
Craig,
other?
do you have a question?
Sorry.
Nah, I'm gonna shut up. See you at Urban Roots.
We're good. Well, I really want to thank Katie and James, Kalinda, and Michael Grove for really doing a real big heavy lift on all of this work. They rolled up their sleeves and really just, they did a ton of research on other contracts and really had a goal of trying to improve for chairs. And we will be reaching out to you, right? We know that there's gonna be different questions. There will be a full strikeout language part of the contract. This is where we integrate the old and new. We're still in the process of doing that, but we hope to have it sent out around Tuesday, if not sooner. We also, I saved in the chat everyone who signed in as well, so that but we also know that all the campus presidents can reach out to the chairs list. And as other questions come up, we will certainly kind of develop an FAQ to try to answer things as they go. But we do really, really appreciate everyone who showed up. And if you have other chairs who are asking what happened, tell them that we hope to have this recording posted by Sunday night or Monday morning.
And there'll be a kind of a full circle to it. Thank you, Kalinda, for bringing up with us in the last few days that we need to continue to follow up with folks. We got so much great material with that survey that that we're going to come up with something to keep that route of communication going to see as this rolls out. So we can jump on any problems immediately and there'll be a venue for you all to share them so we can kind of see all of them at once.
I think Kalinda may have a last thing to add here.
Linda?
I just wanted to say, like, thank you for all the work you all do. The survey showed, I mean, we already knew how much work you did, but the survey was overwhelming with the work that you all did. And I will say that I really, really hope, and especially for the small departments, that this does what we intended for it to do, and that you feel good enough about it to ratify it. If you don't ratify, right? Like, I don't want you to feel persuaded. I just want you to know that legitimately, when Katie says that she stayed up late at night and she was running numbers, that's legit, right? And that we really did try to put eyes on this in multiple ways, because we know how hard you work, and we were working for you all in trying to do our best for you. So hopefully that's what we have achieved. And we really do thank you for your work. And we know that many times that work is unseen. So thank you.
And I'm